Everybody, it's Romania Black, and we are on episode 8 of Dororo. Now, 8 is my lucky number, so I'm pretty excited about this episode. And last week was a really nice, just like single one-shot episode talking about, just a man loving a monster. And all that goes with it. Oh my gosh, last week was a lot of fun with the man and the silk spider monster. The demon that he came to love. So it actually went a different direction than I thought it would be. So I was really happy about that. And I'm pretty excited to see what episode 8 has in store for us. I feel like after the incidents of episode 6 with losing Mio, our boy Hyakkimaru and our young lad Dororo, they need some time to heal. They need some time to fix themselves, to be able to explore a little bit more, to understand a little bit more about the demons, because Hyakkimaru is facing the struggle of he himself could become a demon if he lets his anger get overrunning his emotions because of the lingering aura of the demons that have followed him since birth. So I feel like taking a couple weeks to kind of get caught up in that is a good thing, and to kind of sort those things out. And plus we are basing this off a 1969 anime, which back in the day was very episodic. So I feel like they're trying to modernize it, and I really appreciate it. So with that, I've got a couple comments from a few people that I want to touch base on before we start. So Anime Annie, I am catching up to your comments. I'm only caught up to episode 4's comment because Anime Annie, I love them. They're on Patreon. They write such extensive comments, and they have never really spoiled in their comments, but they write really long analytical comments, so it can be done. Use Anime Annie as a model. And so they had comments for episodes 3 and episodes 4. With episodes 3, they said, though there isn't a contrast mirroring Jukai and Daigo in episode 3, there's also a contrast between Daigo's wife after the birth of Hyakkimaru in the episode and how she is after the birth of Tahomaru. And I thought this was really good to point out, because with Hyakkimaru, when the land wasn't as well off, she was sitting up and holding him in her arms when he was born. But with Tahomaru, she is laying down, completely covered. Her gaze is glancing over to the headless totem, as she clearly remembers the previous labor that she went through. And it's a midwife who hands Tahomaru over to Daigo in this instance. Yeah, so there's already without, and I feel bad for Tahomaru because he doesn't have any control over this. He can't help that this is how it is. But with Tahomaru, there was a midwife handing the baby to Daigo. She had all these luxuries. She didn't have to struggle as much having him, and usually the secondborn, not always, some people struggle with their secondborn more than their first, so you can't always say that. But she had a lot more resources the second time around, but all she could focus on after the fact was like the first birth, where she held her son in her arms and she handed him to Daigo, and it was such a different atmosphere. And I feel bad for Tahomaru because he just doesn't get it. And it's not really his to get. That's the problem. He wants to know, but it's like something like that is so personal. It's like, do you get that right? So I'm very curious to see where that goes for his story, but I thought that was really good to bring up. And then for episode 4, Anime Annie said that Osushi, the sister, grabbing at her hair when her hair covering was coming off made me really feel for her. Anime Annie says in those times, in the West as well as the East, hair was seen as a symbol of status, mostly for women, but in some countries for men as well. Those that found themselves in dire straits would cut their hair and sell it to wig makers. With Osushi reaching for her hair being short, and it being revealed to her brother, it was a final piece that the show really gives us with how hard times had fallen on Osushi. And I commented back to Anime Annie being like, the saddest thing of all is that Osushi and her brother were both ashamed of themselves, and they didn't want their siblings to see that. But the irony is, neither of their siblings cared. Like, Tenosuke didn't care about his sister not having her hair anymore. And the sister didn't care about the brother being, ashamed and forced to hurt people. Like, they just wanted to be with their siblings. And that's why it was so sad in episode 4 that they just couldn't have that. And so I love this show kind of like exploring those types of themes. And then Anime Annie also says that the origami cranes could also be a callback to their previous life. Origami cranes typically symbolize longevity and good fortune. Well, they did both somewhat have longevity considering Tenosuke's survival with the cliff and Osushi finding a way to survive even though she was left alone. But they definitely lost their good fortune considering Osushi's fall from being a noble and Tenosuke as a samurai, to Osushi being a peddler and Tenosuke to be a deserter and a murderer. So yeah, I thought that the symbolism in episode 4 was really, really good, and I'm glad that you pointed all that out, Anime Annie. That's awesome. And then Elusive Someone the elusive fangirl, says, I can see that it's been commented here, but it hasn't been commented here, but it might have been on Patreon. It wasn't until Anime Andy commented it for episode 4, but I'm glad that someone, the elusive fangirl, points this out, saying Dororo calls Hyakkimaru Aniki, or big brother. So in episode 4, the episode with Osushi and Dororo, it shows they are especially fond of their big brothers, but one was gained and the other was lost. So yeah, the last couple episodes, I haven't really talked about it, but I have noticed that Dororo has called Hyakkimaru Aniki, and I only know what Aniki means. I know it means big brother from reading Twittering Birds Never Fly, which is a Yakuza BL, but in that series, you know, they're called Aniki, which is like the boss or the big brother. So I knew what Aniki kind of meant from that meaning, and I was kind of viewing Dororo, like looking up to Hyakkimaru and considering him like a brother figure. And so it's nice that you all have confirmed that. But also I love what Elusive Fangirl said about Osushi and Dororo losing a brother and gaining a brother in the same episode, because this was the first episode, number 4, where Dororo started to call Hyakkimaru Aniki. So good stuff, really good stuff. But I've talked enough. I can't wait to dive into this episode. I hope you all are excited as well. But we're not going to waste any more time. We are going to dive into episode 8 of Dororo, and we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's go. Yeah, I think I could just watch a whole series of Dororo and Hyakkimaru fighting demons, and we don't have to go back to the overarching plot with the dad. Because here's the thing, I was really enjoying this episode a lot, and the story of like Saru and the sister figure and like battling the centipede, and I was like, damn, I really would just watch an entire series of them fighting demons. But all of this is to slowly get back Hyakkimaru's senses, but also to present some other dangers that can happen as he goes. And it makes me more keenly aware that we're going to go back to the plot with his dad and his brother and all this. And it's like, these are the halcyon days, so I hope you're enjoying them, because they're going to get real painful in a bit. So yeah, something else that I liked about this episode was, very much like last week, we have 2 characters that are in a relationship, but we go from, I like how we've kind of transitioned since episode 5. Technically episode 4, really. Well, no, now that you think about it, episode 3, a lot of this series is focusing on relationships. So in episode 1, I guess you could say it's kind of the relationship between the demon and the dad who's making the deal with the devil. And there's the mom and Hyakkimaru's relationship as it's strained as he's taken away from her and chucked into a river, essentially. And then episodes 2 into 3, we kind of get talking about Hyakkimaru's relationship that's slowly developing with Dororo, and it's kind of at its bare bones stages then. But then episode 3 has Jukai, and talks about kind of Jukai's relationship with the people of the village, specifically the one kid that goes away, and then Hyakkimaru, and it's a very platonic relationship. And then episode 4 kind of shows the sister and the brother and their tense relationship, and how one's bad deeds can make them feel shameful and not worthy of the other, even though clearly the other two are totally fine with one another. And then episode 5 and 6, we're focusing on Mio, and not only her relationship with the kids that she's trying to take care of in the orphanage, but also her relationship with Dororo that kind of fosters. And then her could have been a romantic relationship with Hyakkimaru, but then it was tragically cut short. So then these last 2 episodes, episode 7 focuses on a romantic subplot with the demon and the man, who end up going off into the sunset to go have their monster loving shenanigans together. And then in this episode, we have the exact opposite, whereas in episode 7, the spider demon, she was actually quite lovely and wasn't killing anybody, and she was just, having a coexistent relationship with them that was symbiotic, but was benefiting her and doing minimal damage to the humans involved. And then her and the man went off together. Here, again, it's this idea of coexistence, But unlike the spider demon, who was very upfront and vocal about like, oh, I'm not going to kill you. I'm just going to, do whatever. This demon, his idea of coexistence, and I'm saying his with not understanding what gender this demon is. It's a demon. Its idea of coexistence is not as equal and is a little bit more give than take. So it's a little bit more, I'm going to take from you. You're going to give me the virgin body I'm going to take with me. And then I'll maybe leave your village alone until I conveniently decide to come back. Because I was like, as they were explaining what went on, I was like waiting for Dororo to say, well, you gave him the virgin bride. Why didn't he move on to the next village? Because he saw you all were a pair of suckers and he just kept coming back because he knew you'd keep feeding him, right? It's kind of like we had an old bull at my grandfather's farm, and I had shown him for years. And he was so sweet. His name was Bouncer. And Bouncer, one day, my grandpa was like, I don't know, Bouncer's not looking too good. And I was like, oh my gosh, what's wrong? And he's like, well, he was sitting out in the pasture and he wouldn't come up to eat. So I took him some food. And my grandpa was like, and then he ate. And so he's just not been coming up. And I'm like, well, of course he's not going to come up. He's a trained domesticated bull. We showed him. He's used to laying down and we give him a feed pan. Like, you've just nurtured that behavior. So now he's like, why would I get up and come over to that feed bunk when you're going to bring it to me? So you just basically door dashed our bull. So of course he's not going to go up there. So yeah, I kind of felt like the centipede monster in this was the exact same way, where the monster was like, you gave me a free meal. Why would I leave? And and the village, because of rituals and all this and not understanding and just doing it blindly, didn't quite understand what was going on. And that they thought it was just a giant ominous cloud when it was really a centipede demon that was preying on this village that kept giving him free meals. So that part was so crazy, but I do love like the little bits of mystery at the beginning of this. Like, for example, the bits of mystery at the beginning where there was the ash falling from the sky, and we don't learn until later that it's the molten skin of the centipede, and the fact that they give the bride, we don't know what happens to them, and the fact that they show the chair at the beginning. Like, all the imagery was really, really well done. The one thing that was mysterious was at the very beginning, there was a figure standing there with their little hat down holding a staff. And we never got to see their face. They looked kind of ominous. And they looked kind of like a temple monk, kind of like the monk that was in the demon temple at the beginning with Daigo when he came to pray to the demons and they took Hyakkimaru from him. So I was kind of like, is this like a precursor? Did all these demons come to the villages because of this shaman? Or is that just a random detail that means nothing? I don't know the answer to that question, right? We don't know the answer. But yeah, all the people are like, it's raining ash. And so, of course, anytime humans don't understand things, they instantly try to scapegoat and think of a way out of it to save themselves, whether it's legit or not. So it floated over the land all alone as if left behind. And they called it the Forsaken Cloud. Now, the intro makes the cloud seem very kind of sympathetic, like, oh no, the demon was left behind. And the thing that kind of does suck is that unlike the spider demon who can speak English and illustrate and communicate their woes, the demon centipede kind of can't. So who's to say? But I mean, the fact that it kept, killing people is pretty ominous in itself. Spider demon didn't do that. So okay, so the stink bogs that they're going through, the steam little canyon here, it reminded me of in Labyrinth, where they call it the Bog of Eternal Stench. And I was like, I had to make the joke. But yeah, smells like rotten eggs from all the gas and the methane, right? And so we find out the Hyakkimaru has not been able to smell, which is surprising no one. It's part of his, mask, the fake nose. And so Dororo, which is kind of interesting because when his face, but back in episode 1, when his face ripped off, the fake nose was there, so the real skin came around it. So that does make sense. That does check out. I feel like MAPPA has kind of had to find a way to modernize the 1969 version, because I'm sure in the 1969 version, things might be a little bit more simplistic, because that's just what you could do with the technology at the time with the animation. So here they're trying to update it and make it make sense. But MAPPA is actually really good at that, because I've watched Banana Fish that they adapted, and Banana Fish takes place in the late 80s, but MAPPA adapted it to be like early 2000s, and you can't really tell. Like, you would never know that it's an 80s anime from the way that they find little subtle ways to adapt it and still keep the source material as accurate as possible. So that's pretty good. And Mappa's doing Ranma half right now. So I've never seen Ranma half. I remember there were 90s commercials of it in my Pokemon VHSs. Where I'd pop in the Pokemon VHS and there'd be I thought it was one half. I thought it was Ranma one half when I was a kid. I don't know if that's the correct pronunciation, but I remember seeing the commercials as a kid and being like, that looks interesting, but I've never seen it. So who knows? Maybe if people recommend it, I'll put it on the polls in the future. Who knows? But yeah, I feel like Mappa's pretty good at adapting, oddly enough. I just wish that they would go back and finish what they started with some projects, but we'll ignore that for now. So yeah, one thing that is interesting about this adaptation, speaking of which, is the fact that Hyakkimaru cannot talk and doesn't really want to try. They're just kind of like, it's whenever they feel like it. And I find that interesting because from what I've seen of the 1969 version, Hyakkimaru in that version is speaking from episode 1, like is going, all right, Dororo, let's go on an adventure, and sounds like the very cheesy 1960s protagonist voice, like the Superman voice, which that was the storytelling at the time, so it makes sense. But I like the decision that the updated version makes to make Hyakkimaru kind of work for it. Now, I feel as if that barrier in communication is going to be a problem down the road when his brother Tahomaru is trying to talk to him and he can't communicate. I feel like that's going to create a rift or two, but who knows? I guess we'll find out. But yeah, so we meet Saru and his platonic sister that is being sacrificed as a bride. I love the little, like, at first it felt very Princess Mononoke. One thing that I do like is that none of the people sacrificing her seem happy about it. And it honestly seems like it's a ritual they've been doing that no one wants to do it, but it's just, how they still have enough people in this village since they're sacrificing all the women, who knows? But I mean, I guess they just have a lot of kids and they're like, hope your kid doesn't get kicked off the island. One thing I do love about this series is that Dororo is getting to interact and meet kids his own age that have similarities to him. And Dororo is so friendly and charismatic, and he instantly like connects with people and instantly befriends them. And I kind of love that because when we met him at the beginning of the series, I thought he was just going to be this little arrogant little scamp. But Dororo has such a little heart to him, and he's so interesting to watch and see how he interacts with others. Not only the kids, but the adults too. Like when he interacted with Mio and he could connect with her struggles because of his mom. Here, he can connect with Saru because Saru's lost his parents, Dororo's lost his parents, and Saru has kind of attached himself to the sister, and Dororo has kind of attached himself to Hyakkimaru. So it works out pretty well. I wish Biwamaru was back. I miss him in the story, but I get that it would be hard to travel with 3 people in this situation. But I love Saru's design. I love that he has the animal skins. I love he's this little mountain man that like has grown up by himself. He was raised by wolves, bitch. And then he skinned them and wore their hides. Felt very Tropic Thunder for a second, but I love the idea that he's like, we've got to stop them from sacrificing my sister. And Dororo's like, oh, friend, we are Ghostbusters. Let me tell you, Hyakkimaru and I, we're here to stop supernatural forces and save the day. So it was very cute. I just love when Dororo's like, for a fee, we'll save your sister. We know a thing or two about beating monsters. I like that Hyakkimaru was just like, I didn't sign up for this, but okay, fine. So they've taken her there to get sacrificed. And they're like, from time to time, the black cloud would show up and just eat people, but they would sacrifice the bride and then it would leave for a while and then come back. So, I mean, there's a lot with that storytelling that is very exaggerated. So it's kind of like whenever in Pirates of the Caribbean, when they come across a pirate ship and they're like, oh, it's the Black Pearl. They've never left anyone alive to tell the tale. And they're like, well, then how do you know the tale? You know, it like when Saru says, oh, well, if you don't feed the centipede, it's going to eat all the village. And they're like, well, how would you know? If the village was eaten, nobody would know. So it's the idea of tall tales and how they've been spread and how rumors spread and what people take for face value versus as fact is interesting. But I didn't know what to make of the cloud because I thought at first that maybe it was a hoax or a gimmick, but no, it was a demon and its skin shed around it formed this cloud like pig pen off Charlie Brown. But this series right now is focusing a lot about monsters. And how do we communicate with monsters? How do we deal with monsters? How do we define monsters? And I think that's very important because you have Saru, who the village kind of thought for a while was a little monster and chased him away from his home. And then you have Hyakkimaru, who is the obvious character that people are like, he's a monster. He doesn't even have arms. You know, it's going to kind of suck when he has actual arms, has to carry around a sword. Right now, he's got a convenient sword arm they can just whip out. So I was thinking about that in the ED. What all does Hyakkimaru have left now? He has his ears. He has his nose. He has his pain receptors. He has his skin. He has a leg. He has both legs now, technically, doesn't he? No, he still has one fake leg. It's just the real leg got eaten by the Sarlacc pit and then it grew back. So he still needs another leg. He still needs 2 arms. He still needs eyesight. That's the main 4 things. Those are the main 4 things. He needs those. And then we believe he has a heart and soul. But those are the main 4 things. Another leg, 2 arms, and eyes, for sure. Eyes that I'm assuming when he gets eyes back that he will have eyesight. So we're going to talk about the eyesight thing because I hadn't even thought about that in particular, but I'm very curious about a certain aspect of this show, so we're going to talk about it. The maggots, no. Maggots are like one of the I guess they're more like grub worms. I guess grub worms are okay. Maggots are like some of the most disgusting bugs on the planet. I'm like, ugh. And they're not even that scary looking. It's just the implication of what they are. And I'm like, but the gold amidst the bugs. And I like at the end that Saru told him he had a lot of gold and Dororo became No-Face from Spirited Away. And then at the very end of the episode, Saru reveals that it was mainly like dandelion fluff. And he's like, here you go. And Dororo is disappointed that he didn't specify clearly. But yeah, Dororo getting to make a friend that's his own age with Saru and having all these comrades. It's super cute. And then Hyakkimaru looking at the cloud. Now it makes sense because Hyakkimaru was like, that's a big ass demon. It's all red. What do we do with that? But, well, speaking of big ass, we have this chair this stone chair is huge. And I feel for this poor girl getting stuck there. They didn't really say what her name was, but I felt for her that she's just stuck there waiting for this thing to eat her. Like, how traumatic. And then Saru comes to rescue her. After we find out that Saru is not her biological brother, but just like a little platonic brother that he's kind of like inserted himself into the family dynamic. That makes a lot more sense because at first when she was like, oh, Saru, what are you doing here? I'd be like, you're not questioning why your brother's dressed up in a wolf pelt? I mean, cool, but now it makes more sense that he's not her biological brother. He just he's been clinging to her and she kind of has taken him in. So, but they have this argument here and he's like, and he brings up a good point. He's like, the village doesn't care about you. They just care about themselves. And that's why they're sacrificing you. And she tries to be the nice saintly figure and phrase it as, oh, well, but I wanted to save the village. So I volunteered to do this. And I'm like, girl, you ain't Katniss Everdeen. Don't be volunteering as tribute for this. I wouldn't volunteer as tribute to be eaten by a centipede. I don't know anybody that would. I'd be like, are we really okay with this? It keeps coming back. I don't know if it's really doing what it's supposed to do, sacrificing all these people. But I also like in this episode that in the background, there's all the mist and everything and the geysers. You kind of see that throughout the episode and they don't ever draw attention to it, but it's really neat. So yeah, Dororo shows up. It says that him and Hyakkimaru are going to try to defeat the monster. And then we find out that it is a massive centipede. Because at first, when they said it was just a cloud, I thought, well, maybe it can't eat people. And we were instantly proven wrong when it took literal chunks out of those people's bodies. Girl is lucky she got swallowed whole. I'm just saying. Those guys got chunks taken out of them and were dead. She got lucky that he swallowed her without chewing and she was just chilling out in the stomach acid for a day or two. Girl got lucky. The only unrealistic part of this episode was Hyakkimaru and Dororo falling through the sky and landing in the water because realistically, if you fell from that height, even if there was water under you, you would be dead. Like, if this was a real show, there's no way they could have fell from that height and survived. But I don't know how the 1969 version does it. And I'm going to give them benefit of the doubt because we are dealing with supernatural creatures. But I'm just saying in a real show, they'd have been dead. But we'll overlook. That was the only part that took me out of the realism of the show. I was like, they shouldn't have lived through that, but it's fine. It's not a big deal. If that's the worst we got to deal with as far as unrealistic things, we're all good there. But yeah. So the part that I hadn't even thought about was the fact that Dororo could not see the centipede. That the cloud of its skin and the flesh and everything and the wall of fire, quote unquote, which was the smog, it was all demonic energy. So it all just looked like white noise to Hyakkimaru. Because I've been really worried ever since he started gaining back his senses. Like, sense of smell, that's really useful. That actually could help you a lot. The sense of hearing, it was overwhelming at first, but he's gotten used to it. Being able to have a voice, that's helpful. But the sense of sight has always been the one sense I've been kind of dreading him getting back, because he's developed his fighting style and a lot of his moral compass based off of his disability. And he views people not as how they look physically to us, to the human eye, but how their soul looks. And so my biggest fear has always been when he gets his sight back, he's not going to be able to tell based off of their soul anymore, and it's going to make things a lot more complicated. But this episode kind of revealed that there are instances where having normal sight would have been really helpful. Like, if he had normal sight, he would have probably killed the centipede really quick, but he wasn't able to do that, and he had to rely upon sound. And dear God, Dororo getting knocked out, I was like, huh, like that created a lot of tension of just like being, which it makes sense if you're getting rocks slung everywhere. Of course he'd get knocked out. I'm surprised the poor kid didn't get concussed. But I feel like it's interesting to look at when you think about it, because episode 1, Hyakkimaru would have been killed by this thing in an instant. No sight, no sound. He would have been dead. Like, end of story. So it is coincidental that he met this centipede after gaining back his hearing, because otherwise I think he would have been dead. Or they would have had to find some other way to do it. He probably could have used touch if he could feel, but it's interesting. So, and I also like Hyakkimaru's eyes are very dead and cold, so they're really hard to tell what's going on. But man, that girl was ready to sacrifice herself. She was ready to go. She was like, "You'll be all right, Saru." And Saru's like, "The fudge?" So, and then of course the light makes the centipede leave. Centipedes are creepy, y'all. I had one in my kitchen once and I was like, ugh! They're just creepy looking. There's nothing inherently wrong with them. They're just very creepy. And a lot of times they use them in horror movies and So I like getting Saru's backstory, where he was just this kid living off the land, like killing boars and eating them. The village kind of sucks though, because I mean, he wasn't hurting anybody and they burnt down his house and chased him away. Like, why? That's so mean. And then the fact that he had like broken his ankle, like the way they showed that, it looks so grisly. And then the sister stops and helps him out, right? I think that there's a nice comparison between Saru and Hyakkimaru as these two characters that kind of have this savage wild beast mentality to them. And yet it's these two women that are very kind and sweet and sensitive that like stop and help them, that gets them back on their feet. And I like that Saru and her have like a platonic sibling relationship. I think that's really super cute as well. I'm a sucker for a found family motif, so this episode was really doing it for me. But yeah. And so he just wants to be with the sister. I also love that the episode utilizes all of its resources, like taking the dress and giving it to Hyakkimaru, or Dororo used it as the distraction. I thought it was Hyakkimaru at first. Speaking of which, Hyakkimaru throwing the stones and just being mad that he... Well, here's the thing. He was mad that he couldn't get the centipede, and so he's like, But he was also... I love the callback that he was also training his ear to where he could hear the sound of the rock reflect off of something to know where it is. Genius, because Hyakkimaru has to teach himself all of this, right? And then Hyakkimaru hearing the cries of the brother of Saru, and then just standing there and being like, okay. I feel like one thing that's so interesting about Hyakkimaru is we never really get confirmation of his resolve, but we know he has resolve. And then he just looks down, sees Saru crying, and is like, all right, that's all the resolve that I need to move forward. And then we cut over, and then Dororo's tearing up, and I'm like, y'all, stop it. So yeah, we have our battle against the centipede, which was really good. Dororo getting involved freaked me out because I was really nervous he was going to get hurt really bad, but he held his own. I was surprised, and Saru held his own. The only thing that scared me was when he tied himself to the centipede, and when he tied himself to the centipede to get Hyakkimaru to hear, which was genius, and then got promptly knocked out. I was like, well, shit, that's not good. And then luckily he managed to get back in. But Hyakkimaru managing to like yell for Dororo and like trying to call out for him was such a moment. I was like, oh, okay. And then at the very end saying his name. Our boy's getting there. He's getting them. He's doing it slowly but surely. But yeah, Saru doing the whole igniting the fire with the gas and it blowing up. There were so many cool little strategic moments against the centipede. I really, really liked it. I thought it was very, very effective. I thought they were going to melt the centipede away and the sun was going to come out, but the centipede did a nice job of defending itself during that time. But this was a surprisingly interesting fight. I didn't know how they were going to defeat the centipede, but anytime you have a snake-like creature, I mean, it would be a waste not to do the Hercules and Hydra cut it out from within move. It would be a waste not to do that, right? Luckily, he didn't cut the sister in the process. But I did think that this is a battle that Hyakkimaru needed some of the senses that he had in order to effectively defeat the monster. And if he had not had his hearing, he would have been dead. But I love the idea of him trying to get to Dororo, reaching out, and then if he'd had his sight, this would have been so easy, but no such luck. So we defeat the centipede. He gains his nose back. Imagine him gaining his nose back at the bog. What a horrible first smell. Your first smell ever is just rotten eggs. Bleh. No, thank you. I had friends that owned a chicken farm and I used to work for them for like one summer, and the smell of rotten eggs and like birds and bird crap everywhere, it's gross. I've had pigs and cattle, and cattle smell the least bad of all of them, honestly. Pig poop smells really bad. It's got a lot of ammonia in it. But birds are the worst. Birds smell the worst. I think of all of them to me, right? If I had to choose. So, but I'm glad that Saru rescued his sister. They ended up getting the one piece of gold. But look, we gained a nose along the way. And I love that for the first time, Hyakkimaru has very delicate sensibilities. He loves the sweet sing-song voice from Mio. He loves the smell of a delicate flower. Our boy has some very distinct tastes, and I appreciate that about him. That's so sweet. Very sweet. I loved it. So yeah, they're on their way, and then every time Hyakkimaru kind of smiles, it just warms my heart. And then we see him, and then he says, Dororo. Does he say anything else about that? Yeah, he just says Dororo as he smells it. Aw, that's so sweet. So yeah, he gives it to him. And Dororo's face when he realizes he calls his name was so adorable. Like just his eyes getting all huge. Aw. So cute. So cute. I love that for them. Oh. Yeah, this was a nice little straightforward episode. I'm glad Hyakkimaru got his nose back. Good sense to have, especially moving forward. Although I'm curious, like if he smells blood or something, if that's going to be like a trip. I want him to meet Jukai again. I want him to talk to Jukai. But I appreciate the realism of the show in the sense that Hyakkimaru doesn't just immediately start talking in full sentences. Like using his vocal cords when he's never used them in 16 years is a stretch. And is a lot of exercise and will take a lot of work. So I appreciate the show being realistic in that regard. Like that was really nice. So good for them. But yeah, so I'm excited to see what next week will do for us. These last couple weeks have been really super sweet. I've liked these little candid adventures with Dororo. And I feel like it's just slowly getting his parts and pieces back as we go. And then once he has all those parts and pieces back, then the real shit is going to hit the fan. So in any case, if we're looking at it as a 24 episode series, Episodes 1 through 8, if you do it as a 3-act structure, it would be, which here's the thing. I don't think it is a 3-act structure. I think that this is more set up like the Japanese 4-act structure because we have 24 episodes, which means every 6 episodes we would have a different act. So that would actually make perfect sense because episodes 1 through 6 would be Act 1, where we get introduced to the characters, we get to know who they are, we get to know the central conflict. Episodes 1 through 6 did a pretty damn good job of doing that. Then, in a Japanese structure, episodes 7 through 12 would essentially be kind of like the exploration, the shenanigans, building the story. And so far with episodes 7 and 8, we've done that pretty handedly. Then, episodes 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18 would be the twist in the Japanese structure where we've introduced the characters, we've done some exploring with the conflict, and now it's time for shit to hit the fan and for the exposition to build. That would not surprise me. And then episodes 19 through 24 would be the final act where everything comes to a head. So far, we're following the Japanese structure pretty well, but we'll just have to wait and see what that will look like in the episodes to come. So in the meantime, I'm excited to see episode 9 next week. I will say that the one thing this episode also did that I thought was kind of cool was they focus on the idea of names, which is interesting because Dororo means like little wild beast and Hyakkimaru means like demon. So it's funny that the names that Dororo and Hyakkimaru have seem like, one, names that were given, not names they were born with, but 2, they also seem like names that don't fully reflect who they are, which is fascinating. Having watched the series Monsters, there's a lot to think about names and labels and how all that works. But I'm curious to hear what you all thought about this episode down below and your thoughts about the names and how that goes. But I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back real soon with episode 9 of Dororo.